Welcome back to the Game Collection. I am SuperDerek, and welcome back to the world.
Right here! Escape!
My last experience with the original .hack games have been chronicled in another video, but for a quick recap, a company called CyberConnect 2 embarked on the massive undertaking of creating a multimedia franchise spanning manga, anime, trading card games, and video games. This was the inception of .hack, a world in which people play a virtual reality online MMO called The World. This is somewhat important to know about when talking about GU Last Recode, because the second set of media properties takes place after the events of the first. The first set of .hack media was called Project .hack, but this newer second set of media properties is called .hack Conglomerate, which is still ongoing to this day. But when the original 3 .hack GU games first came out, .hack Conglomerate was just beginning. .hack GU Last Recode is an HD remaster of those original 3 PS2 games released for Steam and the PlayStation 4, and includes a bonus 4th entry into the series that attempts to add some more closure to the PlayStation 2 trilogy, but that may be getting ahead of ourselves. It may be best to start by talking about .hack Roots, the anime that chronologically precedes the PS2 titles. The anime picks up with the new player of the world, Haseo, being shown the ropes. Technically, this is the World R2, a beefed-up sequel to the original The World MMO featured in the Project .hack games. It would appear to be Haseo's first time playing a virtual reality MMO, because his wide-eyed naivete leads him blindly into a trap set by PKs, player killers. Haseo's inexperience and low level is clearly no match for being ganged up on by 2 seasoned rapscallions, and just when it looks like it's curtains for our protagonist, a mysterious and well-armed man interlopes. Ovan PKs the would-be player killers and takes Haseo under his substantial wing, and with that, he welcomes Haseo to the world. As it turns out, Ovan is the leader of the Twilight Brigade, a clan of sorts who are searching for the key of Twilight for reasons unknown. Ovan's mysterious demeanor and subtle magnetism makes him the center pin for this brigade, and while at first Haseo is reluctant to swear his allegiance to anyone in particular, he eventually finds himself drawn into Ovan's grand scheme, and makes friends along the way. Or at least tolerating people while keeping them at arm's length. That is, until he falls for his fellow guild member, Shino. The show follows our protagonist and the guild's attempt to locate the key of Twilight and gradually make progress in their endeavors. And it is important to note that he actually does make progress, because this addresses one of the primary complaints that I had about the original .hack anime, Sign. While the overall feeling of the show continues to be slow, broody, and methodic, the overall pacing is improved because it actually feels like there's progress being made, as opposed to the navel-gazing that made the original such a struggle. Another improvement over Sign is that the show actually does get into some action sequences here and there. .hack Roots is basically like what Sign would have been if things had actually happened. While Sign showed people walking, talking, and sometimes running, Roots shows people fighting, flipping, bending, picking up objects, and rotating in zero-G. That said, Roots isn't an action show, and clearly didn't have the budget to be one. The animation quality has its moments, but it was never really intended to be a spectacle during its release.
All in all, .hack Roots feels like the way .hack Sign was intended to be all along, whereas .hack Sign felt more like an optional supplement to the video game series, or vice versa. .hack Roots feels more like the first half of an overarching story which is directly continued in .hack GU Last Recode.
Those titles start off exactly at the same point as Roots. Haseo is nearly toast just before Ovan pulls his buns out of the fire, and with the ne'er-do-wells served well done, Ovan welcomes our protagonist to the world. Fast forward 8 months, and Haseo is a different person altogether. He clearly has his stuff all together and has earned himself a reputation that causes all to gather. The terror of death. The player killer is hunting down PKs and his crush's killer. Shino is gone, and so is Ovan. Twilight Brigade dissolved, leaving only Haseo to go on. Eventually, Haseo catches up with Tri-Edge, the player killer who put Shino into a coma, and he attempts to exact his revenge and possibly wake up his sleeping beauty. But things don't go as well as he had hoped, and he finds himself outmatched, outclassed, and on the ropes. Tri-Edge data drains our protagonist, dropping him all the way down to level 1, leaving him an open target to all the player killers he's crossed in the past. However, something inside his avatar has changed in the exchange, and he finds himself able to draw on a new ability that might give him the edge to defeat Tri-Edge. On the path to his return to power, he makes some new friends that help him along the way and help to break him out of the shell that he's built around himself. He discovers that not only is Tri-Edge still on the loose, but there's a nasty computer virus called Ida that's slowly infecting the world. From a character development perspective, I found that the writers of the game really wanted to show Haseo's progression toward being a hero. In doing so, you'll find that they might have spent a little too much time and effort building up Haseo's character flaws in the beginning to help emphasize his progression. But rather than making Haseo a normal guy who might have some personal things to work on, they essentially built Haseo up as a sociopath who repeatedly verbally abuses his most vulnerable friend, Adelie. To make matters worse, Adelie has the personality of an abuse victim, which only helps to complete the image of Haseo taking out his anger issues by kicking the proverbial puppy.
Haseo?
What? I've already heard enough about Moon Tree Guild. Huh? Why do I have to go too? Just go check by yourself. Fine. If it'll shut you up, I'll go with you.
Eventually, Haseo seems to work out his anger issues and realize that what matters the most are his friends after all, and eventually seems like a pretty alright guy. But for a while, it's pretty tough to grow to like a guy who clearly doesn't seem to deserve the friends that he's got. Character progression does exist for a handful of other characters in the game, but most of the supporting cast is comprised of two-dimensional caricatures. Again, I fault the writing for this because it's certainly not the downfall of the voice acting in the game, which, by the way, is phenomenal.
Hey, you know what they've done just as well as I do. It's their own fault. They deserved what they got.
They deserved it? It's their own fault? Come on! Do you honestly believe that? If you had made one wrong move out there, they could have easily ended up in a coma.
Many of the voice actors and actresses in the game are veterans who you may come to recognize as the voices of Yuri Lowenthal, Steve Bloom, Liam O'Brien, Sam Riegel, Johnny Young Bosch, and many, many more. This veritable smorgasbord of talented voice actors really helps sell the world that the game presents. Even the lovably grating voice of Gaspard.
Yeah, that sounds good. Let's do it. I'm gonna do my best.
But if you prefer the Japanese voice actors, you can switch to those from the game's selection screen.
Taka.
Where GU shines the most is in its vastly improved world and battle system. The experience point system is nearly identical to the original series, which is similar in turn to the Suikoden series. The battle system improves greatly with the fluidity of combat, releasing you from the depths of your menu system. The game has been balanced so that you no longer need to micromanage your team anymore, which is fantastic. Mashing X will lead into combos, and you can switch between weapons on the fly by executing special attacks using the R button. The morale and awakening system is also a really nice touch that adds some much needed depth and variety to the gameplay, because this is pretty much all you'll be doing for the duration of the game, about 65 hours give or take. Especially towards the end of the game, your options really open up, allowing you to pull off some pretty incredible stuff, entirely intentional and on the fly. This is the sort of battle system that I could really sink my teeth into, and I hope that the next time it's used, it isn't slowly handed to the player piece by piece over the course of 3 separate game releases. Boss battles are handled completely differently though, with a whole different battle system in place. Haseo has something called an avatar, which is unique to his player character, and 11 other individuals in the world. These are sort of like giant ethereal mecha, and they also play a pivotal role in the plot of the series. These boss fights aren't quite as fun to me as the main battle system, but the added variety in action is always welcome. Not only that, but the fights themselves look pretty dang cool. During my playthrough, I stuck mainly to the main story quest, but there are some quests that you can do for NPCs in the game, which you have the choice to either do or completely ignore entirely. The main questline also does have diversions from the end goal, which lends itself well to seeing more of those interpersonal relationships flourish and develop over time. But while playing through these, it gradually dawned on me that I was still being pointed at exactly where to go and told what to do, well after the end of the game's tutorial, as if this game had no faith in the player to remember anything that happened as far back as a few seconds ago. I used to think that Fi and Navi from Zelda were a bit annoying, but in comparison, I don't think they're so bad anymore.
I'll log out and check my email or something.
Game designers need to trust the player to pick up on some subtle, and in some cases not so subtle, cues. The upshot of this is that there were very few moments where I needed to figure out what to do next, but the downside is the constant feeling of being railroaded through the game with these designers holding my hand the entire time, and of course, being denied the gratification of figuring out what to do on your own. The visuals of .hack GU Last Recode are, all in all, pretty good, considering the fact that it's an HD remaster. The game features character models and environments reminiscent of the PS2 era and haven't really been retouched. Some of the more prominent textures were replaced by much higher resolution versions, though there are also areas that heavily utilize lower resolution textures. The PS4 is able to run the game very smoothly in high definition, and the cutscenes are beautiful, except for some that I'll touch on a little later on. Something that I found interesting about the GU games is that while the anime story was incomplete without the games, so too is the plot of the games incomplete without the story of Roots. You could think of this one of two ways. Either the games and anime are two halves of a larger whole who complement each other, or the two entries are just incomplete. Luckily for us all, Roots is available for streaming on Crunchyroll and Funimation's online services. The last really cool feature of .hack GU Last Recode is the inclusion of the fourth game that was previously not released on the PlayStation 2. The original voice acting cast reprise their roles 10 years later as Haseo continues his search for answers after the events of the GU trilogy. This fourth game does successfully what I think Atlus was trying to do with Persona 3 Fess's The Answer. It brings the whole team back together for one last hurrah, and maybe provides a few more answers and a little more closure in the process. However, this fourth title does have some drawbacks that the player ought to know about before making purchases based on this entry. First and foremost, the game is about 3.5 hours long, as opposed to the 18 or so hours of each of the games prior.
I see. There's not much time. I have to hurry.
Second, the game is a stripped-down version of .hack GU, which removes a lot of the extra functions from your desktop and, in my personal opinion, a lot of the tedium that goes with the original 3 titles. This fourth and final entry in the GU games may in fact be my favorite entry, if only for the vastly improved pacing of the game. Strangely though, in a bizarre twist, the cutscenes within the game actually take a significant hit that left me scratching my head. The games ran in a perfect 60 frames per second, but the character animations were jittery and stilted and were closer to like 10 frames per second. It's clearly an aesthetic that they were aiming for, it's just a bizarre choice. So is Last Recode worth the $35 or so you might spend on it today? Well, from a pure value perspective, the remaster costs about a third of what it would cost you to buy all 3 original PS2 titles. And the Japanese audio option, added features that I've barely touched on, and HD resolution make a pretty good argument for it. The battle system is leagues ahead of its predecessors, and the overall quality of life improvements in the game make for a vastly improved experience.
I do have my gripes about the game, and it did tend to drag on and on there for a little while, but I think that people who are interested in a fluid action RPG with MMO accents and an animated series tie-in would be totally over the moon for what this series has to offer, and that's why it's got a spot in the game collection.